So welcome everyone. I'd like to start right on time. At 8 o'clock, I have to get through 1,000 years of history, so I'd like to take up the full amount of time. And also, I believe in being timely. So let me just welcome all of you for coming to this very special presentation, which is sponsored, of course, by Tauck. My name is Elaine Ruffolo, and I teach Renaissance art history in Florence. I've been teaching Renaissance art history in Italy for almost 30 years. And in fact, right now I'm speaking to you from Florence. I teach undergraduates, I teach adults, I teach museum groups, alumni associations, and I'm a partner of Tauck. In fact, some of you may recognize me who've come through the Florence program. I give the history of Florence presentation for the different Tauck programs. Just about, I guess it was 3 weeks ago, I gave a presentation for Tauck called The Notorious Caravaggio, which drew a nice audience and we got very good reviews. So Tauck invited me to come back again. And they were so kind. They said, well, talk whatever you want to talk about. And I chose, of course, Venice, 1,000 years of history. I did that for two reasons, because I love Venice. And I also thought it was important because so many programs that Tauck sponsors, the travel journeys that Tauck runs go right through Venice. I think I counted up 8 different programs that go through Venice. And I hope that this was a way to incite you to come back to Italy. I mean, not right now because, international travel is not really possible, but keeping it on your calendar to come back. And I really thank Tauck for giving me this platform to talk about the art and history of one of my favorite cities, really in the world. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Kevin Barnett. Kevin is my friend and my colleague. We taught together, worked together at Syracuse University in Florence for many years. And Kevin makes this whole thing run very smoothly. If you have any kind of technological problems, just put in the chat and Kevin will respond to you. Kevin has muted all the microphones so that we don't get feedback, and also muted the chats so those don't pop up. But at the end of the presentation, you'll have a moment, please, to send comments and questions. I really appreciate that. And I guess I'll close this short introduction by telling you that I really feel like I've got the very best job in the whole world. I teach Renaissance art history in the very city, Florence, where it was born. And I travel throughout Italy, through the streets, the piazzas, the museums, the monuments. I just love it. But unfortunately, that is on hold for a while. And so what I've decided to do is pivot and bring the art and architecture of Italy into your homes. I do a presentation on Sunday evenings, and you are more than welcome to come to my website, subscribe to the live presentations, and you're welcome to join us, for example, even tomorrow night if you would like. I'd also ask you to consider making a donation if you'd like the program. This will help my business stay afloat in these very troubled times, to say the least. And I've noticed so many of you have already made donations, and I thank you, a heartfelt thank you for that. It's going to help me keep going. So with no further ado, let's now turn to our topic tonight, which is Venice, 1,000 years of history. By the opening of the 15th century, Venice was enjoying an unprecedented period of wealth and prosperity. She was the undisputed center of international trade and one of the great cultural centers of the world. Her trade routes extended like tentacles across the known world, leaving from, here is Venice, up through the Dolomites, all the way to the lucrative courts of the north, down the Dalmatian coast, off through the Bosporus, up into the Balkans, Antioch, going along the Silk Route, all the way to the courts of Kublai Khan. Let's not forget for a moment, the most famous of all the Venetian explorers made it all the way to Xanadu, Marco Polo traveled through Asia along the Silk Route between 1271 and 1295. And so the next time we all make that joke, Marco Polo, you understand that Marco Polo was a Venetian exploring all the way to the Levant. And I think that's so fascinating. The Venetians were sea folk, soldiers, merchants, traders, pirates, pimps, but above all, they were smart businessmen, really bent on making their fortune and turning profit in the city of Venice, which became the wealthiest city in all of Europe. Let's not forget that it was in Venice they practiced the art of double entry bookkeeping. They developed government bonds. The first postal system was developed in Venice. They didn't invent the printing press, but they developed a thriving printing industry, the biggest and the most efficient in the entire area of Europe. And unfortunately, they also invented income tax. So if you think about Venice, Venice is just unique. We've got Rome, we've got Milan, we've got Siena and Florence. Yes, of course, they all have classical roots. But Venice is unique in that the Venetians made Venice. They even made the very land that Venice stands upon or is built upon. And I think that Venice is an example of the ingenuity of man. That is, and this is the theme that's going to run throughout my presentation this evening or this morning and afternoon, taking disadvantage and spinning it to their advantage. Venice is one of humanity's most inspiring examples of creativity and what man can achieve. Some people say that Venice is sinking. They say it's crowded, it's touristy, the canals smell bad, but they've been saying that for hundreds of years, yet we keep coming back. The allure of Venice, this city that is somehow halfway between water and sky and land, and this whole amalgamation of all these things is irresistible. And so we keep coming back. But I think what's interesting is to go back for a moment and ask ourselves, how did all this come to be? And the answer to that question will take us back to the very beginnings, and the beginnings of the Roman Empire. And that's where we begin. So here's a map of the Roman Empire right at the height of its power. The greatest extent of the Roman Empire, which will, you can see my cursor, I hope. Of course, it starts in Rome. All roads lead to Rome. We've all heard that term before. And Rome, of course, Italy is in the Mediterranean. What does Mediterranean mean? Mede, terra, the middle of the earth. And the Roman Empire is going to grow. The way it grows economically is that the Romans will conquer their neighbors and then tax the heck out of them. So they bring this incredible, so by the height of the empire, it's going to include Britannia, some of Scotland, of course, Hispania, which is Spain, Mauritania is Morocco, parts of North Africa, all the way to, of course, Egypt, the far-flung region of Judea, off into Mesopotamia and Iraq. Frankly, the Roman Empire can't get much bigger. They've overextended their borders. That pesky religion called Christianity comes in on the scene. What's wrong with Christianity? It's monotheistic, meaning one God. See, the Romans didn't care what God you prayed to, but first you had to pray to Mother Rome. And that already starts the disintegration of the empire. Then Constantine the Great is going to split the empire between Rome and Constantinople. And that's pretty much the death knell of the Roman Empire. And we start to see the beginnings of barbarian invasions. All right, so now I'm in the year, let me give you a year, let's call this about 390, are the beginnings of these major invasions of barbarians. The word barbarian actually comes from the term babblers. because they said that anyone that couldn't speak Latin or Greek sounded like they were babblers. And you know the names of these babblers. Look, the Britons, the Saxons, the Franks, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, where we get our term vandalism, the Huns with Attila the Hun. And this interesting map I'm showing you shows you how they all roads lead to Rome and all barbarians come to Rome. So I'm bringing this up because right here, right on the edge here, here's Italy, obviously. And there were two major Roman towns, one called Aquileia and one called Ravenna. And these were major port towns. The port of Ravenna was called Classis. In fact, I'm going to talk about Ravenna tomorrow night. Anyway, the smart people, the smart Romans that are living here on these two major Roman towns, they got to get out of the way of Attila the Hun. And so they move off into the water. I guess they figured out here's a kind of a romantic image of Attila the Hun. Attila the Hun was very good on horseback, but he doesn't float. And that's how Venice is born, by going into the safe and relatively shallow waters of the Venetian lagoon, while the rest of the Italian peninsula is falling into this period of strife. See, people are leaving the Roman towns. They go off on areas called fiefdoms at the tops of hills. There's marauding barbarians. I mean, it's, you know, like Game of Thrones or something. And those smart Roman fishermen, most of them, move off into the Venetian lagoon, into the Northern Lagoon. Love this picture. I took this picture in February on a very clear day when I was up in Venice doing a field trip. And I thought this was really interesting because you can see that we're right at the foothills of the Dolomites. That's what these mountains are here. And this is the Northern Lagoon, which is quite shallow. In some parts of the lagoon, you can jump off and just be up to your knees. And in other parts of the lagoon, you can be over your head. And of course, the builders of Venice knew this, so they knew where to build and to keep the canal safe. So they're able to get away from these barbarians by building out here. But it was a little still too close for comfort. And they end up building even further away from the mainland. Now, this is a very early map of Venice that shows you how the Venetian islands are built up. This is the mainland up here, where my cursor is. And then down here, this funny little hook structure right down here, that's called the Lido. And the Lido is a spit of land that is important because it protects Venice from the open sea. And it also protects Venice from the mainland. So this is a unique position, and the Venetians start to build up islands within this whole area. Now, how do you do that? I can never figure out unless I have a visual. So I was trolling around the internet this week preparing for this presentation so you could have an idea of how Venice was built. What's it built upon? And it's built upon millions of stilts, pilings. The Venetians call them pile. And on this left-hand side, this was taken, a photograph was taken where the pilings are sticking out of the mud when they were doing a restoration work. So you can just see the tops of the pilings. Then you can see a layer of stone and then brick. And then this particular stone here, that's Eastrian marble. And Eastern marble is unique because it's waterproof. Then above that, you have more brick, and then on top of that, the buildings. And these two kind of funny characters give you an idea of how they were able to set down these pilings. The pilings are made of oak from Slovenia. Some are larch. And the quality of the oak and larch is that it grows very tall and very straight. So they go, basically there's no tree left in Slovenia because it's been completely deforested by the Venetians. They take that, they sharpen the edge, and then they drop it down into the mud like this. That noise is important, so I'm going to do it again. What I'm trying to get at here is that the piling is set down into the mud and it's sucked into the mud. Therefore, it is privy of oxygen. Okay, here's another image. So here are the bricks up the top, limestone foundation. This is the wooden rafts. And then here we've got those wooden piles that are set down through the layer of mud where that sucking into the mud comes from, all the way down into the bedrock. And that's how Venice is built, upon this kind of a structure. Here's another view, which I think is super interesting. Here you can see all the different pilings underneath, then those different layers, and then here are the palaces and churches and what have you. And because this whole thing is on top of really stilts, they have to build the buildings very light and fill them with as much fenestration as possible. You know, more windows, the lighter it is. And of course, that necessitates the fact that glass is being made, of course, in Venice. So it's a light city, wooden buildings, sometimes clad in marble, lots of glass, lots of light, all on top of stilts. I mean, wow, what an amazing feat of ingenuity that they were doing back in, 400. All right, then the next question, or this is a good view too. It gives you an idea of how Venice is built up. Just look at how Venice is made of basically a series of islands. There are 118 islands that are connected by 400 bridges in the city of Venice. Let's scroll across. There are 150 canals, 231 wells, and 139 churches, all in the city of Venice, as you can see. So the next question you should have is, what are they doing there? Why? What in the world? Yes, it's for safety. And the fact that they would go to such lengths to avoid these barbarians, I think is quite telling of how dangerous things really were. Somehow barbarians always sound like something, again, from Game of Thrones, but it must have been so devastatingly, dangerous, like what was going on in, say, Syria or Rwanda years ago, were just that people had to get out and protect themselves. So the answer to what these Venetians were doing is they're trying to survive and, of course, make a living. And the first kind of business, of course, is fishing and fowl. And the Venetians, naturally, because they're in the Venetian Lagoon, which has this wonderful ecosystem, are going to be fishermen, first and foremost. And then, of course, hunters of birds. And this is an early image of the Venetians out on different, they're called sandolos, the kind of boats that they're on. I like this detail in the background, so I'll get a close-up. You get an idea of how they were fencing these areas off. And these buildings in the background, looking like straw huts, must be what the structures looked like in the very earliest days of the Venetian Lagoon, taking advantage of that ecosystem. So hunting and fishing, and then salt. So in the lagoon, there are these enormous salt flats called the Bacan, and that's where the Venetians were able to gather salt because of the position between the sea and sweet water. They were able to take the salt, put them on enormous salt beds and pans and dry them, and of course sell that. Now, salt, I mean, we don't think of salt as being so important today, but of course it is. I mean, how else do you preserve meat or fish? The word salt is the base of the word salary, from Latin, sale. You're worth your weight in salt. Salutation, all is about salt, and it reflects really the idea. There's a good book written about, I guess, 10 years ago. I can't remember the name of the author, called Salt. That's a very good read, and it tells you how important a commodity, of course, salt is at this time, and the Venetians were already getting wealthy because of that. But then, of course, the Venetians figured out that they had this unique position between east and west, between, air and water and land, that they could trade they could bring in goods from the east, sell them to the west, and vice versa again. And the Venetians became the greatest traders in history because of those ships I showed you. I'll get into that a little bit further. So Venice, and they would import them, and then of course put a tax on them. And the city of Venice, it will in the early days, Venice is going to look to the east because it was a more stable world in the east, and specifically they're looking towards Constantinople. Remember, the Roman Empire, the Rome will fall in 476, but the other part of Rome, because it had been split in two under Constantine the Great, was of course Constantinople. And that's going to go on until 1453. And the Venetians will look to the east first, and then later on they'll look to the west when things calm down. And pretty soon there's an even distribution of goods between all of these cities. I love this old woodcut that gives you an idea of how cosmopolitan Venice was. Venice in the year 1300 was a city of 120,000 people, friends. I mean, that's one of the biggest cities in all of Europe. It goes Florence, Venice, Milan, and Paris. It was a cosmopolitan city. You had a mix of not just Venetians, but Germans and Brits and Slavs, Greeks, Jews, Arabs. You know, Venice had 4 synagogues and it had 2 mosques, and everybody's living in relatively tolerance and peace, because the Venetians were much more considered about turning a profit than, putting any kind of beliefs down someone's throats. And here are, again, this cosmopolitan city, which really worked. You could buy anything at the Rialto Bridge. The Rialto, those of you who've been to Venice, we always go to the Rialto. I mean, it makes me laugh because they have been ripping people off at the Rialto, since 1000, and they still are today. And here's an old image of the Rialto. Comes from the word Rio Alto, which means high land. It's the highest or shallowest part. And the bridge crosses over this relatively narrow part of the Grand Canal, and that's where business was going on. So what were you buying on the Rialto Bridge? Well, you were buying brocades from Florence, tapestries from Flanders, spices from the Levant, minerals from Egypt, perfumes from Asia Minor, silver, pearls from China, timber and copper from Germany. That's the kind of choice you had at the Rialto Bridge. So besides news at the Rialto, Shylock could have bought any of those objects and traded them. Now, another major part of the wealth of Venice comes from something called the Arsenale, which is a shipbuilding plant. And the Arsenale employed an army of skilled workers because, of course, Venice needed those ships. They also needed ropes and sails and masts and wood, and everything was coming together. This is an old painting by Carpaccio that leads you into the Arsenale. These 2 towers on the left and right hand side lead you inside. There was a chain across it, so you couldn't come or go at will. And then you can see inside where my cursor is, it looks like a factory, doesn't it? And it was. So these ships were being made in this assembly line production. And up until the Industrial Revolution, it was the largest industrial complex in all of Europe. The Venetians, at the height of their power, they could construct a ship, 1 warship per day. Now, this image I'm showing you it's not a warship, it's called the Bucentoro, which is the Doge's ceremonial boat, which was very ornamental and beautiful. But you can see all the different ships here in the Bacino or in San Marco Basin. And the Venetians developed a kind of ship called a cog, which was very quick and quite maneuverable, which they could use. So think about this whole shipbuilding mechanism. And that will come in a major play for yet another way the Venetians are making money: Crusades. So the Venetians are happy to not start the crusade. Crusades were started by popes. Instead, they would supply the material that was needed for a crusade. So when these characters are going to go off to kill the infidels, right, in Jerusalem, they're going to come to Venice. They're going to get a ship maker. They're going to get a contract signer and sword makers. And maybe they're going to stay for a couple of years to buy trinkets. And it becomes a whole big cottage industry of taking not only crusaders off to the Holy Land, but even pilgrims. And in one of the most, and these guys come back from the Middle East with new ideas, double entry bookkeeping, Arabic numerals. Gosh, I always tell my students, you try to times 27 times 527 using Roman numerals. The whole idea of what is the greater society in the year 1000? The Arabs, for sure. They'd already gone through their Renaissance. Also, China and India. How do we get the knowledge from those areas? Thanks to the Crusaders. And the Crusaders in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the Venetians give them a ride. They're going off to kill the infidels, to bring the Holy Land back into Christian possession. And the Venetians take a detour, and they stop at Constantinople. That's still the outpost of the Roman Empire. It's Christian, by the way. And they sack it. And they take away the 4 horses from Constantinople. They take off decorations, and they bring it back as booty to the city of Venice. And that's why Venice has this really remarkable feeling of East and West. And those treasures are taken from Constantinople. Okay, so now you've got the idea of how Venice is making money. Next, you need to have a government. If you don't have a stable government, I don't care what's going on in terms of the economy, you're never going to reach a period of affluence and importance. The Venetians formed a republic, unique in Italy. So you got to think of Italy like a giant petri dish. And they do all kinds of experiments in political systems. Florence was a republic, but it was almost a pure democracy. There were duchies, the papal state, the kingdom of Naples, the kingdom of Sicily. But Venice was a republic where the aristocracy did all the voting. So in the year 1297, something called the Serrata, they took the noble families, they closed the book, closed the golden book, and only those families could vote or make the major decisions for the most serene republic, La Serenissima Venice. That's like 1% of the population. Here's the Doge's Palace. Okay, if you've ever been to Venice, you've all visited this or at least seen it from the outside. It's a beautiful building. I always like to teach this building as a perfect amalgamation of East and West. So let's start at the bottom. Here, for example, coming in close, you can see this bottom loggia, this whole walkway along the Doge's Palace with this kind of shaped arches here that look, they look ogive, they look almost Gothic. Then you move up to the next level. This is the piano nobile, or the noble floor, which has these interesting shaped arches with little floral motifs in between, looking like something from a mosque. And then here at the top, you can also see the treatment of the brick. This is all beautiful pink and white brick, which almost looks like silk. And the windows themselves, these enormous windows, again, look Romanesque. And at the very top, it looks to me almost like finial work, something you might see in France. So it is a perfect, from top to bottom, it is a mix of architectural flavors, really, I think, a nice metaphor for the city of Venice. So that's where the government is seated, and it's 1% of the aristocracy that deals with things. And I put this in here because I thought it was so funny to try to see how complicated it is to elect the Doge. The Doge is a Venetian word for duke. 30 members by lot choose 9, 9 choose 40, 40 choose 12, 25 become 9 by lot, 9 elect 45, 45 reduced to 11, and these last 41 elect the Doge. So clearly it is carefully choosing the Doge. And here's an example of one of the great Doges, again, the Venetian word for duke, who is typically an old man, way at the end of his career, with not any axes to grind. He's got very little political power. He's much more of a figurehead than anything else, kind of like Queen Elizabeth, think of it that way. And it worked. This kind of a political situation really worked. So now I've got money being made, a political situation that's working well. I'm missing one piece of the puzzle. I gotta have an important saint. And Venice didn't really have any important saints. No European capital can do without a Christian legacy. It's a way that these capitals will legitimize their city, and they need to legitimize their city with a relic. But because Venice was born only in the 6th century, she didn't really have a Christian history. She was just water before. You know, they brought over a couple of relics of like St. Theodore and kind of Eastern saints, but that's just not gonna, you know, cut the mustard. So they did what any self-respecting Venetian would do. They made it up. And according to the legend, in the year 64 AD, Mark, the Evangelist, had gone off on a boat and he was spreading Christianity on a ship. He was headed to the town of Aquileia and Grado. And he had a shipwreck. The ship blew off course near Aquileia and it landed in an area called Rialto, high water. He got off the boat. He waited for the storm to subside. He thought he was, you know, a goner. But in the middle of the night, an angel came to him and said, Pax tibi Marcum Evangelista meum, which means peace to you, Mark, my evangelist. Here will rest your soul. And that's what you see the lion here, this is by Carpaccio, with the Doge's palace in the background, is holding those words, Pax tibi Marcum Evangelista meus. And you'll notice that his paws are on the land and his other back paws are on the sea. And this is the idea that the angel told Mark that he would stay there, that's where he would rest, gave permission for the Doge eventually to get the body of St. Mark to Venice. So now we fast forward and I go to the year 828, when two Venetian merchants, one named Buono and the other named Rustico, they were going off to do business in Alexandria in Egypt. And they had overheard when they were in the port town of Alexandria that the Caliph was going to tear down the church where St. Mark was buried. He was going to turn it into a mosque. So they decided to take the body away and bring it to Venice, really as a prize to the Doge and as a great relic for the city of Venice. So they stole in the middle of the night. They got underneath the church where Mark was buried, and they opened up his tomb. And the thing about saints you got to keep in mind is that if saint doesn't want to be moved or she moved, they'll move. So the very fact that Mark allowed these two merchants to even get him out of his tomb meant that he wanted to go somewhere. But they knew if they took Mark, they were going to get in trouble. So what they did is they untied these purple robes that Mark was hidden in, undid the wax seals, and put Mark in a barrel of pork covered up with pork and cabbage. That's that funny basket you see right over here. So here's his body. I know it's Mark because it says Mark. And then here's the basket that's covered with cabbage and pork and cabbage and pork. Why? Because the Muslims don't like pork. And they fit in another saint named Saint Cecilia, who's kind of a minor saint, stick her in the purple robes, seal up the wax, and they take Mark off to the boat. The other thing you should realize about saints is they emit, when they've been removed from their tombs, they emit this incredibly good smelling perfume. So when Mark was taken out, this beautiful scent wafted through the port while the two merchants were trying to take him to the boat. And of course, the Muslims figured, we know what's going on. There's a heist. And they ran to the tomb of St. Mark. They opened it up, but lo and behold, Mark was there, all tied up in his purple. But of course, that was the dupe. And that's how they were able to get him into the boat. Then the customs men stopped him. They stopped the two merchants, and they opened up the barrel of pork, and they said, "Canzer, canzer." You can even see it up at the top, which means dirty pork, dirty pork. And that's how Mark was able to be smuggled out of Alexandria. And here's another image of that, showing us the body of Mark. I can tell we're in Alexandria because there's a camel back there, even though to me it looks a little bit like we're in San Marco. It's by Tintoretto. And Mark is taken, and he is appropriately and justifiably buried in San Marco. And there it is. One of the great works of architecture in history. Now Venice has an important relic. This is San Marco. Again, a beautiful image to some. Ruskin wrote The Stones of Venice, and he called this building a multitude of pillars and white domes clustered on a long, low pyramid of colored lights, a treasure heap of gold, mother of pearl and opal, with crests and arches breaking into a marble foam laid with coral and amethyst. Wow, hubris. Then my other favorite description of San Marco comes from Mark Twain. He said, in a book called Innocents Abroad, it looked like a vast, warty bug taking a meditative walk. No matter what you think about San Marco, stepping into San Marco is like stepping into some kind of an Eastern dream. And now you understand why it's there and how it is a celebration not only of the Saint San Marco, but the whole idea of Venice, East meets West, which you can all see. Look at the ceiling. It's all mosaic work. There are 2 American football fields worth of gold inside San Marco. And this is the famous Pal d'Oro. Pala d'Oro means the golden altar, which is 6.5 feet tall, made of gold and silver, with 1,921 gems attached to it, including 526 pearls, 330 garnets, 255 sapphires, 183 amethysts, 13 jaspers. I mean, it is a medieval tour de force of medieval workmanship, celebrating the interior of San Marco. So now we're set. We've got this period of Venice, population, civic pride, political stability, an important worthy saint, all coming together to make this period that we call the Serenissima, the most serene republic. Okay, that's your background. Now let's go ahead in this next part of my presentation and talk about how the art is applicable to this here in this Serenissima, the most serene republic. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's a city of trade. And by the end of the, I would say maybe more like the beginning of the 1400s, there's a terrific amount of knowledge being exchanged between Venice and the Low Countries. The Low Countries meaning Flanders. You know, Flanders and Venice today, Holland, have a lot in common. They're both filled with canals. They're both, you know, lower than seawater and trading places. And we think that it was through the Dutch or the Flemish traders that the first idea of oil painting comes into Venice. Let's take that a little bit further. So here on the right, that's 3 cups of oil paints. And over here on the left are pigments. And the pigments come from all over the world. This beautiful blue you see comes from smashing up lapis lazuli, which comes from Afghanistan. This yellow comes from saffron. This beautiful red in the background comes from something called vermilion. This is called Prussian blue. Oh, this purple you see, this comes from a sea urchin found off the coast of Morocco. So it's only in Venice that they're going to have this kind of materials. And when oil painting comes to the knowledge of the Venetian artists, they got the very best pigments at their disposal. Furthermore, we're back to the Arsenale, the shipbuilding. What are one of the major components of a ship? The sails. Think about how much canvas there is available. And oil is perfect to be placed on canvas. It's just the right vehicle. And canvas was a plethora of canvas available to these painters. And last but not least, the Venetians, I mentioned very quickly, were great glass producers on the island of Murano. And the very best Venetian painters would crush down the glass and sprinkle it into the oil paint. So when the light would hit it, you get this beautiful refraction. So once again, you know, taking something that hostility or something that is difficult to work with and spinning it to their advantage. All right, so that's where oil painting. Here's an example of the difference between oil painting, fresco, and tempera. So here, this lower one, this is in Florence. This is a tempera paint, a fresco, which are pigments suspended in water and placed on a wet plaster. And you can see the results. It's rather muted. You're able to paint over great spaces of wall, but it's not luminous. This painting everybody recognizes, I'm sure. This is by Botticelli. And Botticelli kind of mixes this up. This is tempera paint on canvas. Highly unusual. Tempera are pigments that are stirred up in egg white or egg yolk. And it dries very quickly and it's quite permanent. But once you get it on there, you can't change it. Same thing with fresco painting. Once it dries, you're done. And it's perfect for a city like Florence, which is for most of the time hot and dry. And over here on the left, this is by a Flemish painter named Roger Campan. That's oil. And you can see how he's able to get so detailed. You know, can even see the smoke rising up from this candle or the luminosity of this. And the Venetians take the tradition of oil painted and they bring it to new heights. Here's a good example of a beautiful oil painting just behind San Marco. I highly recommend going to see this the next time you go to Venice. It's by Giovanni Bellini. He's painting this about the same time as Michelangelo's painting the Sistine Chapel. And you know, just take your time with this. Star of the show, the color. See, we have this tawny orange of Peter, the apostle, wearing this luminous purple undergarment. Look at the light here and how he allows that light, that highlight that you can only achieve with oil painting. Then this man here, that's Jerome, wearing this very deep red. Look at the folds and how he's able to convince you that there's three-dimensional quality. Then he repeats the purple of Peter and puts it onto the body, the dress of St. Lucy over here, or maybe Mary Magdalene. We're still not sure who she is. And then he takes the red of Jerome and puts it onto the red of St. Catherine of Alexandria. The blue, expensive, because it comes again from lapis lazuli for the robes of the Virgin Mary. Come up with me. And notice at the top, I have a painted mosaic with a crystal glass, again, just like the glass of Venice, which should remind all of you of the interior of San Marco. So Venetian painters are using this new kind of oil painting technique, but they're never very far from the whole tradition of mosaic work. All right, so here, I just did these categories of different kinds of patronage, art patronage in Venice. And you can break them down into these four categories: state, obviously churches, scuole, and private consumption. So I just wanted to show you one of each to pull this all together. And the state is almost always a metaphor for the importance of Venice. This is a late painting by Giambattista Tiepolo. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It's inside the Ducal Palace, but it's, you know, it's rather late. It's right at just at the end of the Republic. But I wanted to show you this because it is an allegory of Venice. And here you can see the beautiful city of Venice. How do I know that's Venice? La Venezia, La, so she's female. And I can tell it's Venice because there is the most adorable little sleepy lion over there on the left-hand side. She's also carrying her scepter and crown. And over here on the left-hand side, you can see the god Neptune. I can tell by his trident. And if you look, he's holding what looks like a cornucopia, but it's actually a fish with all the treasures of Venice, including corals and gold and pearls and coins coming out, showing us the importance of the sea for the city of Venice. And that's a state-sponsored image of propaganda. They're grand. They don't show an individual. It shows an idea that celebrates the grand Serenissima. And now let's do a church. And I chose this one specifically. This is close to the train station. It's a huge church, big for Venice. It's called the Basilica of Santa Maria Glorioso di Frari, which is a mouthful. It's very plain on the exterior with its brickwork. It's actually a Franciscan church. Let's step inside. And it looks like a giant, you know, kind of like you're inside of a ship of some sort. And in the middle of the nave, which is the main hallway, there's a structure called a rood screen, R-O-O-D. And the rood screen divides up the worshiper, us, from the Franciscan friars who would be beyond this. And the greatest painter, perhaps of them all, from Venice, Titian, uses that rood screen to his advantage. So you see what's going on here is he takes the screen, which has an arch in the middle and the crucifixion up top, and then he places his painting, which is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, in the distance. And it forces the perspective for us. Okay, let's step inside. Once we get past the rood screen, we can see that Titian's got a difficult situation to deal with. And his difficult situation is all that glass, all that light. And remember, I told you need all the glass to keep the buildings light. And the quality of light in Venice is remarkable, but shooting in at all different angles can blur your eyes. And Titian deals with that by making these figures enormous. This thing is like 24 feet tall. The figures themselves are like 7 feet tall. They're just monster size. And this was painted in 1514 by Titian, be about the same time that Michelangelo finishes the Sistine Chapel. About the same time, let's see, that Leonardo da Vinci is going to be painting the Mona Lisa, just to give you a reference point. And you'll see that compositionally, Titian divides it into three. So let's read the painting. 1, 2, and 3. Here are the apostles down below. The apostles are amazed because Virgin Mary is going up to heaven. But what Titian does here is he uses that red, see, red, red, purple, purple, green, green, and as a rhythm to move your eye across the picture plane. Very powerful figure who must be Mark, reaching up with this cute little puto who looks out at us, little cherub with this adorable little belly, who's holding up all of these clouds, leading us to the Virgin Mary, who's wearing this red, a luminous red, and she's backlit by this yellow, again, reminiscent of the interior of St. Mark. And then at the very top, you can see coming in like a 747, God the Father showing off. And even this close-up here, excuse me, here we are. Look at those adorable little putti. You know, I mean, I just love Titian because he's got the best pooty booty in all of Venice. And that's a good example of painting inside a church. Okay, next category was going to be confraternities. Confraternities are, to say the least, an important institution. And most people aren't really familiar with them. They're called in Venice, they're called scuole or confraternities. And they're one of the most important factors in maintaining social stability. So remember, I told you that only 1% of the population can actually make any decisions or rule, which leaves out a vast amount of people, the middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class. How do they express themselves? And the Venetians developed something called confraternities, which flourished in Venice. There were over 300 of them, and you belonged to a confraternity. I guess like I don't know, like the Knights of Columbus or something. And you could belong to a confraternity that has something to do with your nationality, the Slavs or the Germans, or what you did for a living, shipbuilders, glass makers, even the lowly fruit sellers had their own confraternity. And their duties, what did confraternities do? They buried the dead, they organized religious processions, they sponsored festivals, they paid for dowries, burials, hospitals. I mean, they were like a little government within this bigger government. And what you're looking at here is really beautiful. This is one of the confraternities called San Rocco. San Rocco. And it's just encrusted with these beautiful buildings. The lower floors where they would distribute alms and help people, like a big hall. And the upstairs, which you can see here, that's where there were individual meeting rooms and then kind of like the board of directors room. Let's step inside. This thing is just over the top. It was painted, 90% of it was painted by one artist named Jacopo Tintoretto, which means the dyer's son. It was very, very religious. He did this out of piety. Then he's going to paint the ceilings, the walls, and the board of directors room, which is really one of the great late Renaissance paintings in history. It's called the Crucifixion. And I wanted you to see this because unlike Titian, Tintoretto uses a very loose brush stroke. It's oil paint, but do you see how it's so much more muted in terms of color? He has it almost monochromatic, and he's using these flashings of light to help emphasize the figure. So here's Christ on the crucifix. And you can feel that it's a stormy sky. Christ here with his head down, with his white all around him. And then here on Christ's left-hand side, that's the bad thief. I can see him being tied down. And then over here on the right-hand side, I can just see the good thief. See him? In very strong foreshortening, he's being lifted up and he's looking to Christ. I can see a character here who's ready to soak the sponge in vinegar and just bring it up to the lips of Christ. Here's the Virgin Mary who's fainted, dead away. There's lots of things going on. Over here, I can see the thieves gambling for the cloak of Christ. They're sharpening these horrific looking stakes. And over on the left-hand side, I can also see members of the confraternity witnessing the whole event. So it's a stormy, turbulent, and this is an enormous painting, like a panorama, as if you're in a theater set and everything's going on before you. It's quite effective inside, and that's what you can do with oil painting in the 1560s. Oh, I put this in, I know I was only going to talk about one, but I wanted to show you this other confraternity image. This one's so adorable. It's by Vittore Carpaccio, and it's called St. Augustine in his Study, 1502. And I like it because Carpaccio paints in this very kind of colloquial way. You get a feel like you can step into this whole scene. And if you get up close, you see that the saint has heard something, is looking out the door, and I can see his books, his inkwell, the desk, this elaborate desk with a bell on it in the background. I can see jars up on top of what looks like tapestries in the background. I can scroll over and see that there's another room here, which has a lectern, an astrolabe. I can see the bishop's mitre in the background. And then the most adorable little dog here, who clearly has heard what his master has heard. He's just turning his little head. See how inquisitive he is? Casting these shadows. And right here, as if the piece of paper has been fallen down unexpectedly, is the signature of the artist. So you get this more intimate space inside these confraternities. Then the last type I wanted to introduce you of Venetian painting are these images that are, they're for collectors. And you would put this inside your home, and you might invite people over and have a glass of Prosecco and try to decide what's going on in the painting. This one's called Giorgione's Tempest, which means it's the storm. And it still is not completely clear what's going on in the painting even today. Some people think this is a soldier and this is a gypsy. Some people think this is Adam and this is Eve, or a god and a goddess and Jupiter coming in on a storm. I think it is a capriccio, which means it's meant for study. It's meant to elicit ideas. And it's also something a little bit sexy about this whole painting. I mean, this soldier looks pretty excited, and she's just hanging out here, you know, breastfeeding on the right-hand side, looking right out at the viewer. It's also a celebration of landscape, which is pretty interesting considering what does Venice not have? Landscape. So these capricci are very popular in Venice right in the 1500s, meant for contemplation. This one's called Col Tempo, with time. And she points to herself, we're all going to end up, and certainly not idealized. Look at her face, almost toothless, reminding us that with age, we all end up like her. And this is the same time as the reclining nude. Again, for individual consumption, the beautiful Venus by Giorgione, which is in Dresden today, which segues into Venus of Urbino by Titian, which segues to Angra's Odalisque, the reclining nude, a celebration of flesh, which begins in Venice in the Renaissance and leads on to the modern art, Modigliani, even Picasso's reclining nude, pop art in the United States, or even shocking art such as this modern Olympia, which was just painted 2 years ago. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. So it's a great time for Venetian painting. It's a great time for Venice. But I hate to tell you this, all these glory days are going to start to come down to an end. And that occurs because of major changes in history and events. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, and that's a big problem for the Venetians because they're not on the boat. I know Christopher Columbus was Italian, but the Italians are fat and lazy. And the New World will be discovered, and Venice will start to fade in importance. Vasco da Gama finds the way around the Cape of Good Hope. Again, a death knell for the Venetians. Julius II, the Pope, comes together with the Milanese ruler of the Sforza, and they go up against the Venetians in something called the League of Cambrai. The Ottoman Empire comes, they completely take over Constantinople in 1453, and in 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, where the Ottoman Empire is at the gates of Venice. The end is here with Napoleon Bonaparte, who has a Jones for Venice, and the last of the Venetian doges in 1797, Lodovico Manin is going to take off his hat, and that's the end of the most serene republic. Napoleon is crowned, he takes over Venice, and we come into this period of decay, where Venice becomes a backwater, a place for pleasure. Carnival went on most of the year. You went to Venice to party and gamble and wear masks. And that is the end of the most serene republic. But can I leave you on that sad note? Is that the end of Venice? I guess I would say no, because Venice, even today, I think is viable, despite the crowds, despite the cruise ships. Let me remind you that this whole idea of Carnevale is keeping up a long tradition in Venice. What about the Venetian Film Festival? What about the all-important Biennale? Every 2 years, one of the greatest contemporary art exhibitions in the world, as well as that of the architecture exhibition. So I would say that Venice still lives, and if there's ever a time to visit Venice, it is this year, next year, before all the crowds come back. And I hope with that, you feel like you've learned something more, a little bit more in depth on the city of Venice, and you all feel inspired to visit the most serene republic. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it. So I'm at exactly 9 o'clock. I really pride myself on being exactly on time because, you know, people's time is important. I'll just make some last announcements. If you would like to join my presentations, every Sunday night I do a presentation at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow's Ravenna, the twilight of the Roman Empire. And then on Tuesday evenings, I have a guest lecturer. I'm so lucky I have these great colleagues, and a good friend of mine is going to come in and talk about super Tuscan wine, which will be fun. So go ahead and you can go to my website. I think Kevin will shoot that out to you in the chat. And, you know, you can subscribe to it. And if you feel so moved, I appreciate the donation. Now I'm going to look at the chats. And if you have to sign off, thank you very much for coming. If you want to stay on, as soon as the number comes down, Kevin will unmute everyone. In the meantime, I'll answer the questions. And you're welcome to hang on or take off. Oh, thanks, Kevin. So Kevin put up the website. You can see where that is. The book on salt is a world history. Thank you so much. It's on my bookshelf. It just came to my mind as I was talking about. Thank you for those compliments. I appreciate it. If you don't have questions, just tell me where you're from. It's always fun to hear where everybody came in from. How did the confraternities raise revenue? People had to pay, they had to pay a membership fee, and members and dues. The wealthier paid for it, kind of like a taxing authority. And they were important because they really kept things running in Venice. And they had a terrific amount of pride and commissioned great works of art. Thank you, Nancy in Washington, D.C., Texas, Florida, Naples. Everybody stay safe in America. You know, things are good here. I read these terrible stories about the virus, so be careful. Hi from Seattle, longtime Tauck traveler. Great. Hope to see you. Happy to do another lecture. Maybe we'll do something on Florence. That would be fun. That's easy. Home field advantage. It's always good. So I'm actually originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I moved to Florence. Are you from there, Susan? Yay! I moved to Florence almost 30 years ago as a graduate student. And as I said, really just found the best job in the whole world teaching Renaissance art history. Oh, good. Come to Ravenna. Ravenna is quite specific. It's an interesting period. We're just going to talk from 425 to about 600. Good. Yeah, Venice is, oh, Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, I'm an alumni of UW-Madison. Silver Spring, Maryland. Terrific. I hope Wisconsin's nice and warm. Good. Thank you, Lee. And so I do presentations for Tauck. If you come through Florence, you'll meet me. I am not related to Sandy Ruffolo. I am actually related to Mark Ruffolo, strangely. He doesn't know he's got a famous cousin in Florence yet, but if you know him, you could let him know. He is actually a distant cousin. Right, New Jersey, wonderful. Yeah, it feels like I wish I was in Venice and Florence. I might run up to Venice. There's nobody there. Will I comment on the influence of Venice on frescoes in the Venetian region? There are almost never frescoes up there, except and you get to Vicenza, of course, when you see the Tiepolos and you see the Veronese frescoes at all those Palladio villas, at that time it is Venice, because Venice will invest in the mainland. And there's cities such as Vicenza, Verona are Venice. Great, okay. What's my website? My website is elaineruffolo.com, O-L-O. Haven't put it at the top of the chat. Little mini vacation, good, yeah. Don't have to walk over all those bridges with me. Yeah, okay, I'll do Florence. I hopefully Tauck will come. You know, we expected about, I thought we were gonna have around 50 people. I don't know what the final number was. It seemed like we were over 200. You give lectures on the insides of the palaces in Venice. No, Elle, but that'd be fun. Be kind of interesting to do. Like, or visit the inside of oh, I can see you up there, Elle, that would be fun. See how people lived in Venice, very sumptuous. I've been in a whole bunch of private palaces in Venice. Though the shape of Venice on the old map resembles a lion, you know, it's often been compared actually to a fish more than a lion. But the Venetians would like the idea of the lion, I'm sure. Don't you love that image of the lion with the two paws on the land and two back paws on the, oh, climate change is affecting Venice quite badly. That people always ask me, is Venice sinking? No, it's not sinking. What happens is because of climate change, the tides have changed so much, and the water comes down and exposes the bottom of Venice, you know, kind of like pulls it down, and that the air and oxygen gets at all those pilings that I talked about at the beginning. And that's the biggest problem. How did the symbol of Venice become a lion? That's a great question, Maureen. So the lion is associated with Mark. And the reason why Mark is associated with the lion, it's a crazy story, is because Mark writes about the resurrection of Christ. And there was an old medieval legend that a lion gives birth to its lion cubs and licks the little baby lion. They're born dead, and the lions lick the little cubs for 3 days and they come alive. I mean, clearly that's a medieval legend, but that's why Mark is associated with lions. Isn't that wild? And you see lions are associated with Christ. Okay, yeah, it's always good to have the background. History of the Bridge of Sighs. Oh, the Bridge of Sighs has that nickname because it's a bridge that leads from the ducal palace to the prison. And when you walk over that bridge on the inside, the very last thing you see before you go into these horrible prisons, you know, like Casanova did, is the image. You can see out the window the basin of the Grand Canal, and the prisoners sigh because it's the last view that they'll ever have. Will the floodgates of the lagoon help? We hope so. That's called the Mose Project. Seems like it might have helped a little bit this spring with the flooding, you know, but half the time they work, it doesn't work. It's also been a very big boondoggle, and lots of money's been skimmed off the top of the Mose Project, but hopefully it's going to be, it'll be helpful. Where crazy is most of the art of the Biennale off the wall? Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like there are two sections of the Biennale. One is contemporary art that's you can read about and listen. You go with a guide, and they kind of lead you through it. And then there's the stuff in the Arsenale. Arsenale is really cool to visit because you can see where the old ships were built, and that's like wow, off the wall. You got to go with an open mind and just stroll through and, you know, enjoy it because it is over the top, but in a fun way. Do I think Italy will be open to the U.S. visitors anytime this year? I'm hoping that it'll be open by, you know, I would think August, but now America's got to get control over the virus. I think Italy's got, everything's pretty good here, and Europe is getting better because we locked down really. I mean, I'm sure you guys all watched it on the news. We were in lockdown for over 2 months. I mean, seriously, could not go out. If you went out, it was just to take out the garbage. But now things are pretty good here. So now I think it's actually on the United States side. I hope so, because, you know, we're just doing nothing here. I mean, I work in tourism, so you can imagine. I love doing this. It's fun. But, you know, we live on tourism, and the best tourists are the Americans. Americans come over, they're curious, they stay, they spend money. It's important for the economy. So, okay, everyone, any more questions? Or hopefully Tauck will be the first group out there as soon as it's safe, I'm sure. Do you know if cruise ships will be banned from, the cruise ships are banned on the Grand Canal. You cannot go on the Grand Canal in a big boat because of the tides. It'll be, you can go beyond it on the Giudecca, and they're still obnoxious though. They're just too big. They need to ban them completely. Oh, can I talk about classical music in Venice like Vivaldi? I would love to, except I don't know anything about it. Maybe I could do a guest lecture, you know. I love classical music. Vivaldi, of course, Vivaldi, I don't know if he was born in Venice. I think he was born in Padua, but that was the time that Venetian art. Yeah, you could play it in the background. My lecture tomorrow, Laura Smith, is, oh, you sent that to me privately, is on Ravenna, which are the mosaics of Ravenna. quite specific. We're going to dive down deep. And my presentations that I've done in the past have been on Florence and Rome, portraiture, mythology. Also did something on Caravaggio. I did that for the Tauck group too. All of that's on my website. You guys are welcome to go and download it, and for free. I just feel like these days we just have to. Oh, how do you get off your chat privately? You've got to hover over my name and click on my name, and it will come up everybody. I know that I like Zoom, but sometimes this part of it's a little bit tricky. Okay, well, any more questions or comments? Kevin, thank you as usual. Are you going to speak? Kevin has a voice. I don't know how to do this, brother. There he is. I knew it. Perfect. He just makes this whole thing effortless. And I didn't have a chance to go through all the Hollywood squares, but if there's any Tauck, last time Robin Tauck was on, I have to go and see if I can find her last name. It was, and a big thank you to Dustin, who works at Tauck. He's the one who does that great newsletter for y'all. And Robin's a good friend as well. It's really, it's a wonderful family company. And I think of all the the travel businesses that are just going belly up, Tauck will never go because they've got this strong conviction, and it's such a strong family that stays together. I really think they're a terrific organization to work for. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to sign off, and thanks for coming. I hope to see you. I hope you guys all come on my website, and we'll get to see each other again. Welcome. Tanti baci. Alla prossima. Ciao, everyone. Ciao, ciao. Buonanotte.